press conference this morning, which was full of information. First, as of June 12th, there are 13,118 confirmed cases of COVID in the city of Boston. 7,987 of those have fully recovered and 673 have died. We go back to the first slide. The trend, the curve is still going down. We've heard throughout the last couple of weeks as we've gone into phase 2 of reopening that, again, just because things are able to reopen doesn't mean that we should. Coronavirus is still very present, and there's still a lot of risk. But we are still moving in the right direction. I myself have seen a lot of people at the beach on the weekend, acting like nothing, everything's back to normal, and it is not back to normal. So things are going in the right direction, but still urging a lot of caution and still wearing a mask outside and following a lot of the precautions that we have been this whole time. To get to some of the talking points from the mayor's press conference this morning, it was really powerful. The mayor declared racism an emergency and a public health crisis in the city of Boston. He stated that the impacts of historic and systemic racism are clear in the COVID case numbers, which we've talked about before, and that the impacts go far beyond the current crisis. And this came with a lot of commitments. The mayor is backing this declaration with an initial investment of $3 million transferred from the police overtime budget to the Boston Public Health Commission, and that's going to include supporting a Greater Boston Health Equity Now plan that will detail objective and measurable goals that will get to the root causes of these inequities. The mayor also endorsed the 10-point action plan put forward by the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus and other elected officials of color in Boston and the Commonwealth. The Boston Police Department has completed its review of the use of force policies outlined by the National 8 Can't Wait movement. BPD is clarifying its rules to meet these standards and has immediately implemented several reforms. These are use of force policies proven to reduce the likelihood of violence. The mayor also announced new steps that he's taking in the FY21 budget to further ground public safety in community health and well-being. So he's proposing to reallocate 20% or $12 million from the Boston Police Department's overtime budget. That money will be invested in community programs for youth, for the homeless, and for people who are struggling with the effects of inequality. So within that 12 million is including 3 million to implement the city's declaration of racism as an emergency and a public health crisis, 1 million to support trauma response and counseling at the Boston Public Health Commission, 2 million for community investments through other city departments, including violence prevention, language access, food security, immigrant advancement, elder support, and the Human Rights Commission, 2 million for programs supporting minority and women-owned businesses, and 2 million for housing security and ending youth homelessness. And lastly, 2 million for emergency clinicians and mental health supports provided through the Boston Police Department when they respond to residents in crisis. So that's a lot of information. And when we do the follow-up email, we'll include some of these talking points so that you can read into this in more detail. I think, it's been a really interesting 2 weeks in terms of how the city responds. And we've been talking a lot about the tension, including in our own sector, between words and actions and people looking for commitments. And I think that this is the sign of commitments. And it's still just a first step, but it's been exciting to see this really come with financial changes, particularly the use of that 20% overtime budget toward other investments in the city. So we'll send this out so that people have time to sit with it. And if there are any questions that people have on the side about what this means for us, which is still a question for us, arts and culture sector, I think we've spent a lot of time at Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture thinking about how we can better partner with a lot of these departments. We do a lot of our own programs that have an equity lens to them, but I think how the arts can show up for where this work is happening in other departments and other sectors is incredibly important right now. So it would be great to continue that conversation with everyone on this call. And with that, I think, Emily, why don't we go to your legislative update quickly here?
Sure, thanks all, and thank you, Cara, for that update and that information. And I want to applaud the mayor's movements of dollars to back up the work that needs to happen. I have one literal update, which is there is a bill that I've talked about before on this call that would create a relief fund for arts and cultural nonprofits in Massachusetts. It was filed by Representatives Barrett and Pignatelli from Western Mass. That bill was assigned to the Tourism, Arts, and Cultural Development Committee and is receiving a hearing today. The way that hearings are working right now, because no one can get into the building, is that you can submit your testimony virtually. And so I'm going to put in the chat box what I hope, give me one sec. And eventually I will put in the chat box a link to a page on our website that gives you instructions and information about what writing testimony is like. It's different than emailing your legislator and saying, I want you to vote for the bill. It's writing in support of the bill to that specific committee and saying that you either support or oppose it. MassCreative supports it. We will be submitting testimony. I know the Mass Cultural Council is also submitting testimony. And again, this creates a fund that the Mass Cultural Council would distribute to provide COVID-19 relief to nonprofit arts and cultural organizations at this moment. So I will put that in the chat box and turn it back over to you. Thanks, Cara.
Great, thank you, Emily. And I think next up we have David Leonard. We're really excited that BPL is on the road to reopening.
Thanks, Cara. Hey, everybody. So I guess we're pivoting in part to the other major public health issue that we're all responding to. And I'm sharing this information, which went out publicly yesterday, really to share with peers and colleagues what we're doing, but also really not just to share what's coming back online from a service point of view, but also to talk a little bit about how we're managing this process and as an organization moving to the first step of return to in-person service. We're being very careful not to talk about this as reopening or return to normal, and rather position this as bringing back the first of our in-person services. So we think that distinction really helps situate how we're approaching this. And we're calling it BPL to go. It's really, you may have heard the term curbside service. Certainly for those of us who've been picking up from restaurants or getting delivery, that's kind of the best analog for what we're doing. So you can find much more details at bpl.org/takeout, and just some details to go over. So over the last week or two, we've slowly had our facilities and custodial staff returning to our buildings to prepare for this launch. On Monday, the balance of the public-facing staff that we need to turn this service on will be returning to our buildings. Again, you know, they'll complete the self-assessments at entry. They'll have their temperature checked. They will wear masks and perform social distancing anywhere within the buildings. We are ensuring that each team of staff is on the right rotation. So we're limiting the number of staff in the building at any one time. And again, continuing to limit that to people directly involved in these services or their supporting services. Which then allows us to start to return to public service in person the following week, June 22nd. And we'll be beginning that, which you'll see on the next slide, at the Central Library and 4 of our main branches distributed throughout the city. Over the coming weeks, additional locations will bring the same service online in groups of 4 or 5. And we hope to bring this out to all locations. There's a few really small ones where we're still planning the details, so we need to complete that exercise as well. In the meantime, all other staff will continue to work remotely and maintain the current status quo, focused on essentially all of the great online services that we have been focused on. We are not activating any additional services in person at this time. No restrooms, no meetings, no events. We will consider some of those options during our next wave, but we really wanted to button this up and make sure that it's really secure and safe for staff and patrons, and bring this online. Any returns, returned books, right now you can only return books to the Central Library book drop, but as branches open, only when those open will you be able to bring books back to those locations. The reason for that is we are going to quarantine for 72 hours any item re-entering the system at the point of re-entry. So it gets dropped off, it then gets quarantined, and only after the quarantine period will staff start processing them and making those books then available for being placed on hold and then being available for pickup. Next slide, please. So a little drum roll for this list, but these are the locations that are planned to open at this point on June 22nd. So Codman Square, East Boston, Jamaica Plain, and Mattapan. These are several of our mid-sized branches, which can more easily support the Holes pickup model and keep staff and patrons at distance from each other. And also ensuring that we had a good distribution across the city. You know, really until we get back to closer to 25, or in reality it'll be 22 branches, because there are 3 closed for renovations right now. So when they can come back, they can open. But right now, Rosendale, Adams Street, and the Roxbury branch at Nubian Square are all either undergoing renovation or not yet reopened. Hyde Park will also not reopen, as it's going into a 3-month repair project. So it just didn't make sense to do that given the timeline. And next slide, please. I think I have a third slide. Thank you. So how do you do this? You can place your order, which is really putting books on hold, via our website. We have launched a new app, BPL To Go, that right now is only available on the Apple platform. The one on the Google system is still in testing, and that will come online as well. So don't show up to the library until you get notification that your holes are ready, and you will then in that notification be able to schedule a window. Yes, you can place the holes on the website as well. So website, app, or you can even use the phone. You can call a staff member and have them do it for you. So we're trying to be inclusive in terms of our outreach on this front. So, but don't show up until you have a scheduled window for your pickup. We want to try and manage the number of people waiting, so that we don't have hundreds of people outside like you would see at a grocery store. So you'll have your spot, and then at the Central Library, we will let people into the lobby, a certain number at a time, and do the pickup there. At branches, it will be largely in the vestibule. So you caught a branch, you call and let us know you're here, and staff will get those items ready for you, and then you can step in safely, pick them up, and off you go. Two other notes. Any library card that has an expiration date in this period, we've just extended them all until December 31st. So there'll be no library cards should be expiring, and if there are any that got missed because of poor timing, you can just call and they can be reactivated. Additionally, any fines waived has now been extended till September 1st. So youth fines have been eliminated last year, so those are already gone. But anyone who has a book out with a due date that looks like it's, oh my God, it's due soon, we're waiving fines through September 1st. Because we don't want people having to make unnecessary trips in until they're comfortable and ready to do so. So that's a quick run through of our very first service, and we'll continue offering all our ebooks and e-content, and continuing to drive wait times down with budget in the meantime, adding online content. We were thrilled to see that many of our books on from the anti-racism book list and a few other things, the whole times where really going up. So we're able to divert some budget to get those down and get those books out into people's hands electronically as well. So anyway, that's where we are with our first return to in-person service. And I think there were some questions picking up in the chat as I was talking. Do you want me to take those now or?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. I feel like I need a moderator. Where are we?
I know one of the questions is about will the lunch area with WGBH studio be open?
No. So thanks, Pascal. So that is not something we were activating during this stages of our return to in-person service. It really is about come in, get your books, and leave again. There are a couple of spots at the Central Library, the Newsfeed Cafe, the restaurant space, the tea lounge that will follow restaurant guidance, which, if I recall correctly, is at the earliest a phase 2, step 2, stage 2 period, which is probably a few weeks out at best. And so we'll be working with our partner on that front. With respect to the studio, we'll be in dialogue with WGBH about when they want to start rebroadcasting. As an event, that would be limited to the 10-person limit right now. And so how we would manage that is still TBD, but that's not in our current phase of return to service.
Right. And I think the next question I saw was, how did you arrive at the 72-hour quarantine timeframe?
We and our colleagues around the country at many libraries have been following a lot of guidance for when the virus is still detectable on a range of surfaces. So a book is essentially paper and additionally may have a cover that is plastic or a hard surface or some other material, sometimes leather. When you look at all of the suggestions about those surfaces, many of them, for many of them, it does appear that 24 hours would be sufficient, but out of an abundance of caution and based upon the IMLS, which is the Institute of Museum and Library Services, plus the CDC and the EPA, we believe that 72 hours is the safest option to choose for any of these items, CDs, DVDs, as well as actual physical books. Additionally, in looking at cleaning, most cleaning materials that would be necessary, I mean, you'd have to clean every page, first of all, and that's not just practical. Most cleaning solvents would do damage to books, so it's better just to wait the 72-hour window and let whatever's left of the virus, if it is there, just die off.
Great. I think those were all the questions I saw in the chat. As we continue, you're welcome to leave any other questions you have for David in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end to answer any more. Great. Thanks so much, David.
Thank you, Pascal, moderator.
Of course. All right. We'll move on to our next speaker. I think we're supposed to go to Natalia, but my slides are a little not updated. So give me 1 second.
All right. You want me to get started, Pascal?
Yeah, Beth, why don't we move to you?
Or there's Natalie, whoever's next. I'm happy to wait.
It's up to the team. I'm here, so I can wait too.
Yeah, we'll do Beth since I have her slides up just in case. Great. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Beth Chandler with YMCA Boston. And we always like to start with a land acknowledgement of the Massachusetts people on whose land we appropriated and we reside. And we want to thank them and pay our respects for what they contributed in the past, what they currently contribute, and to their future contributions. Pascal, next slide, please. Thank you. So again, I'm Beth Chandler, President and CEO of YMCA Boston. Our mission, as is the mission of every YMCA in the country, of which there are 204, is dedicated to eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. So every YW has that mission statement, but how we execute against that mission can look very differently. And Pascal, the next slide, please. Our vision here in Boston is to be a thought leader on issues at the intersection of race and gender, and help individuals and institutions create more inclusive environments where women, people of color, and particularly women of color can thrive at all levels. And so that's the work that we have really been focused on the past 3 years at YW Boston. And as you'll see on the next slide, and by 2024, our intended impact is to be able to measure at organizations with which we've partnered that both individuals and those institutions have changes in policies, practices, behaviors, and attitudes to be more inclusive, and that there's a shift in the demographic structure at those organizations regarding who's in leadership positions, and looking at both formal and informal level positions of power. How more inclusive are they after working with us? Next slide, please. And so, why this work matters, I think, many people know the statistics that we have on this slide, both thinking about a business case and a moral case. It matters. People care about this work. We are going to be in a country, a city and a country that is going to be have no racial or ethnic majority by 2050. Organizations that have more diversity, particularly in leadership positions, make better decisions, or more efficient or more productive, outperform their peers. So it matters both from a business perspective and a moral perspective. And on the next slide, I just have some data thinking about what's happening now with the impact of COVID-19. The people that are being disproportionately impacted in a negative way are those that are people of color, and particularly women of color. And so women are making up the higher percentage of people who are losing jobs because of COVID-19. People of color are being more heavily impacted and vulnerable to the disease itself. And then the burdens that are going to be brought to bear on people moving forward, and particularly women and women of color, in thinking about if kids can go back to school, how that's going to work, who ends up carrying most of the childcare burden in families. It's often women. And so all of these things are really, because of these reasons, as well as with the others, it's extraordinarily important that organizations start thinking with both a racial and gender equity lens on decisions they're making, so we don't see these disproportionate, seeing communities of color, seeing women and women of color being disproportionately impacted, not only by the disease, but by decisions that organizations make when they return back to the workforce. So on the next slide, you'll see our approach to the work. So we provide diversity, equity, inclusion services. We work with organizations across sector. And the way we like to think about our work is, one, we meet organizations where they are. And so we want to work with organizations to establish an understanding of what the issues are. What are the issues both within the context of the country and our history, and within that organization? And how does becoming more inclusive tie into their values? And what are some of the issues within the organization they think might be root causes that are getting in the way from them being more inclusive? And then we want to engage in thinking about how do we get employees within organizations to really think about, what does race mean to them? What does gender mean to them? What does that mean for other people and how they're viewed through those lenses? And how is it showing up in the workforce and potentially getting in the way from everyone being successful? And we do a lot of data collection. So we're collecting data along the way to see both how are people moving in this process of learning? Where might people be getting stuck, and how can we support them? And then action. Every program we do has an action component, so that people not only are understanding frameworks and historical context, having a language that they can use with each other, but they're also coming up with a plan both to be able to change their own behavior as well as change outcomes happening in their organization. So we really think of this as both individual and organizational change work. And the next slide. And then I'll just share our programs. So we have our Inclusion Boston programs. And for us, that's really trying to develop a a critical mass of people within an organization who have the same language and understanding around issues of race and ethnicity so they can engage in conversation. And part of that includes our workshops, and that's providing a foundation for people within organizations to think and talk about these issues. And then our deeper work is our Inclusion Boston work, where we work with a group of 10 to 25 people in an organization. We spend 10 hours talking about race and ethnicity. How has it impacted them individually? How does it impact other groups of people? How is it showing up in the organization? And then they work together to create an action plan to address an equity issue. And we support them for a year in implementation of that plan. And then in addition to that, we have our Lead Boston program. And for a lot of the research we looked at, even when organizations had commitments at the top level for moving equity forward internally, it often got stuck with mid to senior level managers because they didn't have the tools or the language to know how to move that work forward. So Lead Boston is an opportunity for mid to senior level executives across sector to come together to both hear from people in the community. So we may have a day on health equity and have people from, Peter Slavin and his team from MGH, Kate Walsh and her team from Boston Medical Center, and somebody coming from a community health center to talk about what are health inequities, how is it impacting their organizations, how does it impact their leadership, and then people in the class get to think about what does that mean for me, for my organization, for my employees, and then what are tools and best practices that I can start incorporating in my practice so I can go back and be able to move these issues forward in my organization. Sorry, I have a 13-year-old in the other room. In addition to those programs, on the next slide, you'll see that we also realize that there are issues outside of organizations that impact what is happening, and that's where our advocacy work comes in. So this year, one of the big things that we're doing is working on legislation called the Parity on Board legislation that would require all Massachusetts boards and commissions to not have more than 50% plus one of any gender on a board or commission, and that the race and ethnic makeup should at a minimum represent that within the state, and that a targeted effort needs to be made for women of color to be on boards and commissions, because often work that focuses on gender benefits white women, work that focuses on people of color benefits men of color, and so women of color get left out. So we explicitly have language in that bill to promote women of color as well. We have a program for middle school girls, grades 6 to 9. And that's an opportunity because the research showed that when women were in leadership positions when they were older, it was because they often had opportunities when they were younger. And there is a lack of opportunity for girls in Boston in middle school to be in programs to provide them those leadership opportunities. And so that's where our FIRE program comes in. And they also do a project that that they advocate for, that we support them on. And then lastly is our thought leadership, where we are always trying to raise the issue, particularly the intersection of race and gender, and what does that mean? Why should people care? How does it show up both in regulations and rules, laws, and within organizations, and what people can do about that? So that is who we are and what we do, and I'm happy to answer questions, and I apologize if I missed any in the chat.
No, you didn't. Thanks so much, Beth. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a bit while we give you some time to answer any questions. There hasn't been any yet, but one of the reasons we brought Beth on today was because of last week's conversation we had, and we wanted to provide Beth and YW as a resource to any organizations that may need more help or resources in figuring out how they want to diversify and be more inclusive within the organizations. I just need to update our PowerPoint. So if anyone has questions, feel free.
There was one question. Somebody asked where they can find more information about the bill that you just mentioned, Beth.
Sure. We have a website, parityonboard.org. And so you can go to that website, and if you can find out more about the bill, some of the reasons why it matters, and also want to sign up to be a part of that coalition, that would be wonderful.
Great. Any other questions for Beth while we refresh our slides here? All right. Is there a cost associated with these services?
Yes. So our service are fee-based, and it ranges based on the size and sector of the organization. And our website is ywboston.org, and that has all of our programs and fee schedules. And then the Parity on Board focuses entirely on the Parity on Board legislation.
Okay, thank you so much. And yes, Leah will grab that link and put it in the chat. And I think now, if there are no other questions, we're going to go to Natalia Urtubey from the Small Business Office in the Office of Economic Development to give us a little bit more information on where we are with reopening phase 2.
Hi, everybody. Sorry? Hi, everybody. My name is Natalia Urtubey. I am the Director of Small Business in the Office of Economic Development. I wanted to very quickly go over a couple of the resources that we have at the city for reopening, and then I will do my best to answer any questions that are very specific to reopening phases. I'm happy to also give an overview as to where we are today as far as reopening, and then obviously answer any questions. So first and foremost, we know that businesses for the most part have been closed. Reopening is a really tough challenge, and I do want to just start off by saying that if you do not feel like you can open safely and that you're not ready and confident in opening, we ask you not to. I think the mayor's been really supportive of small businesses throughout this whole pandemic, but it is really important that we don't have to close down again. And so you as business owners, the folks on the call that own businesses or manage spaces, you are, really the first step in making sure that we open safely. And so I just want to reiterate that even though we are in this reopen mode, you do not have to if you're not ready to. You can take your time to do this right. So with that, the mayor announced a $6 million fund called the Reopen Boston Fund, really focusing on how we support small businesses to reopen. So what this basically means is that we are giving grants up to $2,000 that can cover anything from PPE to separators to cleaning supplies. For restaurants specifically, it's helping restaurants open outside into having outdoor seating space. So if you have a business, you have to be a for-profit business. You have to have a commercial space in Boston, brick and mortar. You have to have less than 15 employees. And one of the kind of technical things is that you have to have a vendor ID, which is a very easy process, but you do have to do it through the city of Boston to become a vendor. We have the applications, instructions, and budgets available in 10 languages on our website. So if you know of any businesses or you are a business interested in applying for these grants, please do so at boston.gov/Reopen Boston Fund. The other thing that we have done, and you can go to the next slide, is set up a page for PPE. We know that procuring PPE is really challenging right now. There are, lots of businesses that are looking for, different types of grades of PPE. And so we put up a page on boston.gov where it's local businesses who are providing or selling PPE. They are listed on this page and is a great resource for small businesses. If you're looking for PPE, you can actually filter this page in whatever way you like. So if you're looking for face masks or cleaning supplies, you can actually filter accordingly. I also urge you that if you are making PPE, I know a lot of folks have kind of shifted into producing PPE. I highly encourage you list yourself on this page and potentially, get some more visibility there. This page is available. It's boston.gov/business-PPE, and it's a great tool. Next slide. other thing that we've been doing regularly, because there are so many questions and, unfortunately we can't get to all of them in our large platforms. We've been doing small business office hours every Friday from 9 to 11 and from 2 to 4. The Hangouts meet as well as the dial-in doesn't change. It's the same one every single every single week. So if you have specific questions, my team is available on Fridays to answer your questions. We also host on Tuesdays conference calls at 3 o'clock, and those are also live streamed on Facebook if you can't access our Zoom link for whatever reason. Next slide. And then finally, we have a ton more resources. I didn't want to take up a ton of time on today's call, especially because the topics are so important to be discussed. So I just want to say that on boston.gov/small-business, you can click on the COVID-19 update and see all of the different resources that are available. And if you have any questions, you can always email us at smallbiz@boston.gov. And after I'm done speaking, I'll put all the links in the chat so you have them all. I do want to quickly just cover a little bit about what phase we're in reopening, and I'm sorry I don't have the slides to back this up, but currently we are in phase 2, step 1, which basically up to this point, hair salons, barbershops, restaurants for outdoor seating only are open. Retail is open for curbside and and indoors with very limited restrictions, including the number of people that can be in any one space. So the general rule of thumb that the state has given us is 8 people for every 1,000 square feet. Or 40%. So if you have a space that is smaller than that, you'll have to go with whatever number is smaller. So it's really important that you look at your individual business. Every business is very different, and every business kind of needs a tailored response here. So on mass.gov/reopening, you can find out all the necessary information for your business. The city is also going to be hosting webinars for individual business industries. So we are going to be working with Kara's team to present information for the artists and arts community in order for you all to feel comfortable with reopening. And then finally, all businesses are required to go through a specific checklist around reopening, and all of those can be downloaded and printed, and you can just check them off and put them up in your business. And that is really just a way for you to ensure that you're doing everything necessary to open, but also as a visual cue for both your employees and your customers to let them know that you've done everything that you need to do in order to reopen healthily and safely. It's really important that as you reopen, that you are building that trust both with your employees and with your customers, so that we continue to have a healthy city. And obviously, at any point in time, if the data shows us that numbers in cases or deaths are spiking, we will revert back to previous phases. Happy to take any questions. And in the meantime, I will add links to the chat. Thank you so much for having me, Kara and Pascal.
Thank you, Natalia. We do have one question so far. Are 501c3s eligible for the Reopen Boston Fund?
I hate this question because I want to always say yes, and unfortunately not. The only caveat that we have put in is if you are a social enterprise. So you may have an umbrella 501c3, but you operate as a social enterprise. Some very easy examples might be Haley House or Daily Table that are technically nonprofits, but they have a for-profit enterprise. And so if you are one of those, we'd be happy to chat with you about your application, but you have to demonstrate that you are a social enterprise.
Great, thanks so much. I think that's the only question we're seeing so far. If anybody else has questions for Natalia, David, or Beth, please put them in the chat as we continue on. Cara, is there anything else you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I wonder, just before, Natalia, before you sign off, if you could share a little bit just about what our process has been for putting together the city guidelines and just a little bit about how that's working so people can get a sense.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cara. So when the city first started getting the guidance from the state, we were getting a lot of questions around, how we could further clarify. And so the city decided that we are going to be putting out some additional guidance to help support these businesses as they reopen. And part of that guidance is both the delivery of the guidance, so making sure that we have webinars, workshops, and materials that businesses can easily access. I think, and the other piece is really about making sure that the niche businesses and the niche Boston specific requirements are also taken into consideration. So for example, when the state put out a guidance around reopening for offices, we know Boston is much more dense than some of our cities in Western Mass or even the South Shore, North Shore, et cetera. And so we wanted to make sure that Boston continues to be safe. And so we actually put a further deadline and further limitations on capacity for businesses. And so we will continue to explore this as the state gives guidance. Internally at City Hall, we have a group of many different departments who are working very closely on this, including BPHC, our Health Commission, obviously, as well as other departments that interact with businesses like ISD, which is Inspectional Services, our Fire Department, our Police Department, other folks who engage with our small businesses every day and other reopening requirements. And so the policy team has been really involved there. And what we want to do is further clarify and give you additional resources as you plan your reopening. And as I mentioned, any questions, even if it's not specific to a small business, please feel free to reach out to us. We are here to support the reopening of Boston in a healthy way. And so happy to answer those questions.
All right, we just got one phase 2 question. Are we still limited to 10 people for outdoor gatherings? Me Too will begin outdoor rehearsals for mass socially distanced string players this summer, and currently planning to meet in large backyards where neighbors like string music.
That's correct. So the 10 person gathering limit has not changed. You cannot be in a group of more than 10 people, even if you're 6 feet apart in someone's backyard. It is really important that every individual business, group, organization, follows this, because it will help to ensure that we don't go backwards in the reopening phases. And just, I know a lot of people are looking to our outdoor spaces as ways of, both, practicing, musical instruments, to fitness, to, art classes and things like that. And so I do want to make sure that folks, are taking all the necessary precautions, so that you're checking in with the Parks Department if you're trying to reserve a space outside, and that you are following all of the requirements and the guidance very strictly. There was one more question that maybe just popped up.
Yes, it said, how do you classify small businesses under 500 employees?
So yeah, our general definition at the City of Boston is actually less than 50 employees, or less than $5 million in revenue. So we really focus on the tiny businesses. For the funds that we've put out so far, the caps have been very different because of how intentional we're trying to be about who we target. Yes, technically 50 employees or fewer is considered a small business in the City of Boston.
Great. I think those are the questions we have so far. We still have about 10 more minutes, so if anybody else has questions, please feel free to put them into the chat, and we will designate them to whoever they are for. Cara, is there anything else before we begin to close?
No, I would just invite, since we have a little bit of time here, if there's anybody who wants to use the raised hand function or tell us a little bit about what's going on with you as you're trying to think about next steps. Anybody who wants to share or share initiatives. I know there are a lot of people on here who are working on things within their organization or with partners, trying to provide supports to, to the areas that they work in or disciplines that they work in. So if anybody has any updates or sharing out that they want to do, it would be great to hear from folks. I'm not going to call on anyone, but I know you're there. Okay. Emily, do you have anything else for us that we need to know other than that main update?
Emily Ruddick.
Yes.
I would just say that one of the other things that we are beginning to launch, and we're working with a number of partners, steering committee partners with, including Mass Vote and Theater Offensive as our lead steering partners, is our Create the Vote campaign. I'll put a link to the chat in it. This is a campaign that we were working on standing up prior to COVID-19, and it is really about, sorry, I'm just noticing that Deborah Cash has a question that I think it got answered, Anne, sorry. Don't try to moderate and talk at the same time. I'm wasting everyone's time, sorry. So Create the Vote this year is really about voter engagement and participation. It's the idea that arts and cultural organizations play a role in a stronger democracy and a more participatory democracy, and that we, particularly in this moment when significant change is needed in many systemic spaces, and then when we're talking about government on the state, local, and federal level, that the arts have a role to play in making sure that people feel that they can vote safely, they can vote knowledgeably, and that they are part of change. So I'm going to put in the link in the chat box a link to signing up. We're doing a pre-partner registration. This is a little bit different than our previous Create the Vote campaigns, but we're really excited about it and is part of our continued work. COVID-19 related, obviously there's still a lot of things going on. I just want to flag that the PPP program, the deadline for applications is June 30th. So it's at the end of this month. There is still $130 billion in that fund to be distributed. So if there's anyone who hasn't or got turned down the first time, it might be an opportunity to re-engage with a bank and talk about that. Then the other program is the Main Streets Lending Program was expanded. This is a program, this is not for nonprofit organizations, it's for for-profit organizations, and it's usually just for bigger corporations. They've now expanded it to mid and small-sized organizations. Johanna, I do not believe you can get a second PPP loan, but let me get back to everyone on that. But the Main Streets program has been expanded to small and mid-sized businesses. I know that our arts and cultural sector is made up of not just nonprofit organizations, so I want to flag that. And then the Federal Reserve has announced its intention to create a loan program for nonprofits as well. So we're flagging and tracking that. All right, I promise you I'm done now.
Great, thank you, Emily. We do have one question about in-person programming and just an update about if the city of Boston is still planning to not host any in-person programming through Labor Day. I believe that is correct. Cara, can you confirm that?
Yes. Yes.
Great. Awesome.
And I think Ceci also had something she wanted to share. Ceci, you have an update?
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Ceci Mendez-Ortiz from Massachusetts College of Art and Design, the Center for Art and Community Partnerships. And I was on this call with many of you a couple weeks ago, and Cara and I shared about the Radical Imagination for Racial Justice grants. Since that time, we have, we took a moment. Things were just too much. We were feeling the pulse of our broader community as well as ourselves. So we extended what had been a June 8th deadline to what we came to call a July 8th lifeline. So if you know people, if you yourself are interested in applying, there's been tremendous response to not just the invitation to apply, but to the process as well. And we have office hours available over the next several weeks to check in with a member of the team. If anybody or anyone you know, this includes any human 14 years old or up, has questions about the proposal, about the budget, about the process, we're here to demystify that and to answer as transparently and inspirationally as possible any questions people have. So that's imaginejusticeboston.org, and applications will be accepted through 11:59 p.m. on July 8th. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ceci. And I would just add to the question about, let's see, there was a question, is there any talk on city-state level about rent forgiveness assistance or assistance for making physical changes like HVAC to performance spaces? And there isn't anything right now. It's definitely come up with many organizations that I've talked to, and I've asked a few folks to help me understand what those costs are like so that we can get a sense of the scale and how, like, what it would take to actually provide relief that would be meaningful at that level. I think the other thing I've heard as venues try to adapt their spaces is that the operating cost in some cases makes that scenario not feasible, even if you do something like update your HVAC system. So I'm happy to have a conversation one-on-one with people who are trying to get through some of those numbers and see what makes sense. But there isn't anything yet. But I would love to understand more, and we are doing some case making with some partners about that. Great.
I believe that's the last question we've gotten so far. Any other questions? You have 2 minutes left.
Okay.
And I just wanted to plug again, Marianne last week was gracious enough to talk about the culture equity learning community that they're creating. And if you are interested, please submit to the Cultural Equity Learning Community Interest Form. There will be a link to that interest form in the recap email that I'll be sending out in just a couple hours. So if you need that link, just wait for the email. You'll get that along with the PowerPoint, as well as links to the registration links for our meetings in the coming weeks. Cara, anything else before we close out?
I think that's it for me right now. Thanks, everybody. I hope everyone has a good weekend and has a chance to relax and hopefully enjoy some weather and maybe fewer fireworks. Get a full night's sleep. That would be nice. Thanks all.